Hey, everybody, it's Tommy Canale, and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. He was a deputy sheriff and awarded the Colombian National Police Medal of Distinguished Service. He spent 6 years tracking Pablo Escobar as an expert in the Medellin Cartel. Let's welcome back to the show, Javier Pena. Javier, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. So, yes, sir, very good. Thanks.
You are welcome. Let me go back before Colombia. When you were doing small bust operations in Austin, how did you go from there to Colombia? Did you have aspirations to go and do bigger and better things, or did this present itself to you?
Nah, you know what? When I get to Austin, and that's a great question, I'm working a lot of street stuff. And, you know, with being so close to Mexico, I would always hear about this big drug kingpins, big cartel members. I was working the smaller side of drug traffickers. For example, your 1 kilo dealers, your ounce dealers, and methamphetamine in Austin was making a big comeback. Wow. And at that time in Austin, 84 Austin was the capital of the meth lab world. A lot of labs were popping in Austin because of the chemicals. It was easy to get the chemicals that weren't controlled. So a lot of smaller labs in DEA, a lab operator, we had different classifications, and that was like the high classes. So I was leading the charge in class 1 traffickers. Like I said, they didn't have a pot to piss in, but man, they had a meth lab, precursor chemicals. They'd get hotel rooms, small places. So anyway, like I said, the question is, I was always interested in the bigger side, the major leaguers of drug traffickers. I was seeing the smaller traffickers in Austin. That's why I wanted to try to get to Mexico, basically.
Then how did you end up in Colombia, Javier? How did that process work?
That's a great, wow, it was a big mistake. You know what, in my career, it's just been all big mistakes, basically. When I get out of the academy, I wanted to go hit a large city, Miami, LA, Houston, and they sent me to Austin, Texas. And Austin, is the music capital of the world, man. I was single, I had fun in Austin, so it was just all timing. And with DEA, you had to be there about 4 years. You had to stay in your place, then you could apply. You don't get, you had to apply to go foreign. They just don't draft you to go to a foreign office. So I put in for Mexico because, I was there. I knew some of the traffickers. I knew the culture. I knew some of the people. And I'm from South Texas. I'm from Laredo, Texas. I grew up in Hebronville, Texas, population 5,000. Our biggest city was Laredo, which I think at that time was like 75,000. So I put in for Mexico, and I always remember my boss comes in and says, Javier, did you put in for Mexico? I said, no, sir. He says, did you put in for Colombia? I said, no, sir. I put in for Mexico. And my boss says, that's what I thought. Well, something happened and they're sending you to Colombia. Now, and he was very, very distinct. He says, Javier, if you want to, well, let's fight it because you did not put in. You'll get out of it. I said, boss, you know what? If the paperwork's already done, I'll go to Colombia. Didn't really know much about Colombia. Didn't know where it was. Knew it was somewhere in South America. So I went to the map and, saw where Colombia was. And I said, nah, I'm not going to fight it. I'll just go to Colombia. Paperwork's done. Everything's ready. So that's how I ended up going to Colombia on a mistake, basically.
So it had to be this huge eye-opener for you to doing these small bust operations with drugs and methamphetamines in Austin to a guy in Colombia who's hiding drugs and fruit in human beings.
Right. No, it was an eye opener. And like I said, once I started researching Colombia, it was like, wow, what did I get into? And I got a little nervous, a little scared, and luckily, I was single at the time, so I didn't have a wife to worry about kids. I was in Colombia at this time was a no children post. It's either a couple or no, they didn't allow kids to be there because of the dangerous situation. And so I researched it, and then I get even, I guess, luckier because, all right, I was in Austin, and my boss is in Austin. He's called a resident agent in charge. And his big boss was a guy in San Antonio by the name of Joe Todd, who was my big boss in Austin, if that makes sense. Okay. So before I go to Colombia, my boss in San Antonio, Joe Todd, calls me up and says, hey, I just been sent to Colombia as a country attaché, so I'll be your boss there too. So it was like, wow, he knew me and I knew him, and he was a tough boss. He was a good boss, fair but tough. And his name is Joe Talk. He was tough. He was, like I said, expected you to work, and if you did not work, they would let you know. And he was a no nonsense type of guy. So we basically both showed up together, and then all of a sudden he says, Javier, you're going to be assigned to the Pablo Escobar investigation. And Pablo Escobar at this time really wasn't well known. He was known to the people in Colombia. He was known to DEA, but not known as far as how strong and how powerful he was. He was starting off. So I get to Colombia in 1988. And that's basically the height of the terrorism war that Escobar declared on Colombia. So I was there from the ground level. I saw it firsthand, how he started rising, and all of a sudden, that fame he started getting, and the fame was for the wrong reasons, right? Because of the terrorism. And all of a sudden, I'm involved in one of the biggest investigations in the world on Pablo Escobar. And the way it happened, basically, because I'm new to Colombia, and I heard all sorts of horror stories that the cops are all corrupt. No, you can't trust anyone. And I'm a new guy. I'm a new guy, and I start going over visiting with the cops, and I'm like, hey, this people want to work with us. And then all of a sudden, what they were telling me is like, Javier, you're one of the first guys who's coming over here, trying to help us. Everybody else, they don't show up, or they say that we're all corrupt. So we started working and started developing friendships with this cops. And then all of a sudden, they're just like us. They were tired of Escobar. They were tired of traffickers. They were tired of always getting blamed for the drugs that were leaving Colombia, and they wanted to work. And I started working with them. And that group was based in Bogota. So now, fast forward a little bit, when the police, the government of Colombia gets serious on going after Pablo Escobar, they came up with this informal task force, and it was called the Bloque de Búsqueda, the search block for only one person, Pablo Escobar. And these guys I've been working with in Colombia, who are now my friends, were assigned. So everything started, falling into place. They knew me, I knew them. Then all of a sudden I'm going to Medellin with them, and we start, I guess it's basically a full court press on Pablo Escobar. And also I got to mention, I had a senior partner at the time, great agent. However, she was basically leaving Colombia. She was getting married, so her mind was not there. So I started basically taking over the investigation on Pablo Escobar from the DEA side. Me and my first partner guy named Gary Sheridan, great agent. Him and I, we sort of took the lead on going after Pablo Escobar. So I was there learning, and I can tell you, I knew everything about Pablo Escobar. I studied him. I knew his, like I said, family, cousins, brother-in-laws. I knew all those sicarios, the assassins who were working for him. And then one thing we started doing, and we would is basically relaying all that information to the United States, which I don't think it had ever been done. I mean, we were writing 10 to 15 teletypes on a daily basis. And when I'm saying about writing a teletype, it sounds boring, but it's that intelligence that was coming out of Pablo Escobar to the United States. For example, associates working in Miami, guys who were buying his airplanes in Miami, guys who were moving his money, who were setting up the markets. So it was, at this time, we were getting a lot of it through informants. So the majority of it was coming through telephone intercepts, intercepted. And they were kind of, I don't know, I'm not going to say dumb traffickers, but sort of, they try to code everything. Oh, it's, we're going to, I always remember this shipment of cattle, green cattle, marijuana, white cattle, cocaine. They're going to the towers, New York. Come on, the towers, New York. The other one, oh yeah, it's going to the palm trees, Miami. The bottom of palm. Basic stuff. So we were intercepting all this, and they had a big network also going into Mexico with. And I tell people, you know what? We were dealing with Amado Carrillo Fuentes, which in the Mexican traffickers, he was one of the founding cartel members of the Mexican traffickers. So Pablo Escobar had contacts, like I said, Mexico, Central America, the United States. And then we started realizing basically how big this guy was. Everybody had, was hearing the name Pablo Escobar, but then, and I think what did it all also was that the introduction to what's now called modern day narco terrorism.
Sure.
Which we had never seen. And, I tell people I had heard of a sicario, an assassin, but not until I witnessed the sicario world out there that I realized that Pablo Escobar had about 500 of these young thugs all working for him. And you know what? Basically, when we also talk about leadership skills, I said, you know what? I got to say it. Pablo Escobar had some great leadership skills,
Right.
Being a great boss. I mean, I would hear stories from these young thugs, man. He'd go down and, hug them, kiss them, give them money, help them out. And the problem was that all those poor people, sicarios around Medellin, all wanted to be like Pablo Escobar. They wanted to work for him because they knew that Pablo would take care of them. And so it was, about 500 of these thugs all wanting to work for Pablo Escobar. And but like you said, he had no shortage of finding people. People were up there. They would have a meeting, and Pablo Escobar would show up, and this thugs, man, and Pablo Escobar hugging them, kissing them, giving them money, hiring them on the spot. I mean, that was their life. And you know what? I interviewed several of these young thugs who just that sicario world I never really understood, but I started understanding it. For example, one of the thugs, 15-year-old, I'll never forget that interview, when we took him back to our base. And I basically broke a lot of rules. Never broke the laws, but I had to arrest this thug. It was an operation. Long story short, the informant only trusted me. The cops were, Javier, you got to come, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, I arrested him. And once we took him back to our base, it's that I realized what that Sicario mentality was all about. And this guy, 15 years old, told me, you know what? I was living in the side of a street, me and my mother, barely surviving at nighttime, looking for shelter, cardboard boxes, whatever food we could scrape off tables or steal. And then Pablo Escobar drove by. He stopped. He picked us up. He said, me and my mom. Man, wow. He said, that turned my life around. He bought us a house, gave us money, and he said from that day on, he says, I swore my life to Pablo Escobar. He says, I'll die for him and I will kill for him. And then he continued to tell me the story, which, wow. He said, by the way, he says, I've already killed last 2 weeks, I've already killed 10 police officers because Pablo Escobar, during that war, he said on Colombia, declared war on Colombia.
Right.
And one of his priorities was to kill as many police officers as possible. And he would put bounties on the police officers, bounties on a human being. And $100 a hit. Can you believe that? $100 a hit for the killing of any police officer. Obviously, majors would get a little bit more money, but the regular line police officer walking the beat was worth $100. And this thug confessed to me that he had already killed 10 police officers. He said, you know what? When they're walking down the street on a beat, I have a gun. I walk up behind them, shoot them in the back of the head, and I think nothing about it. At the end of the day, I go collect $100 per body because that's what Pablo Escobar wants me to do. He says, my life belongs to Pablo Escobar. And he said, I'm 15 years old. He says, I'm not going to make it. He said, I'll be dead by 21, 22 years old. So as long as my mother has a place to live, as long as my mother has food, has some money. And then he said, you know what, the money I get, he says, I give it all to my mom, except I always leave a part drinking money, beer money, buy a pair of tennis shoes and a pair of blue jeans. He said, that's all I care about. My mom gets the money, but it's that coldness. And you know what I say? And you multiply that by about 500 sicarios. That was the attitude that we're dealing with. And we're coming from the United States. We're not used to what's a sicario. I had to learn the hard way. But Pablo Escobar his forte was the hiring of these young thugs who were all in love with him. They were all in awe of him. They wanted to be like Pablo Escobar. And you know what? He says, man, if you get a hug from Pablo Escobar, that was getting a hug from Jesus Christ. Right. It was that type of attitude that they were looking for. And I saw some horrific terrorism that Pablo Escobar displayed, again, in the killing of the police officers. Then when it really got to everybody's attention was basically when he put a bomb on that commercial airline, the Avianca airline, 1989. It was an airplane that was commercial airline, was going from Bogota to Cali. And Pablo Escobar thought there was going to be one person on board who was basically running for president, a guy by the name of Cesar Gaviria, who was not on board. So the whole placement of that bomb on that airline to kill one person who was not, and he canceled at the last minute. He was going to be on board. He canceled 109 innocent people. And then we saw the destruction of the DOS building. 110 people were killed, where he put a bus with dynamite in front of the DOS headquarters, which was like the local FBI office again. And then what I tell the straw that really put Pablo Escobar as the number one, as really as the number one basically hit that put him on he was already on the map, but really placed him on the world map is when he killed the presidential candidate, Luis Carlos Galan, August 18th, 1989, on a Friday night. That put him on the world canvas. What happened is this guy, Luis Carlos Galan, was running for president of Colombia, and Galan hated Pablo Escobar, and Escobar hated Galan. Galan had kicked Escobar out of Congress when Escobar was an assistant congressman. So Galan had kicked him out. So Pablo Escobar knew. Then Galan is running for president. In the old president, the guy by the name of Barco Vargas, who I consider a hero, his term was ending. Great president, but extradition was unconstitutional in Colombia. And by this time, because of the terrorism that Pablo Escobar was creating, basically Colombians, there was a faction that started saying, maybe we need to bring back extradition. Send these traffickers to the United States. We cannot handle them here in Colombia. And it started getting some movement. There was people that were saying, you know what, let's bring back extradition. Politicians, attorney general. However, on the negative side, I remember the Attorney General Laura Bonilla, Pablo Escobar killed him because he was in favor of extradition. Newspaper editor Guillermo Cano had the largest newspaper business in Colombia, El Espectador. Guillermo Cano writes an op-ed piece about bringing back extradition. Escobar bombs the newspaper building and kills. He kills the editor, Guillermo Cano. So that's why when Galan was running for president and was saying, if I'm elected, I'm bringing back extradition. Wow, people loved this guy because they were seeing a knight, in shining armor coming across, leading with his sword, saying, fellow Colombians, we are fed up with these traffickers who are doing whatever they want. Look at all the killings they're doing. So he had a lot of momentum. So Escobar, and this is where, like, anytime he would do something, like, we would say, what did he do now? It was just, it was crazy. Yeah, Friday night, he had the presidential candidate, Luis Carlos Galan, killed while campaigning on a stage. About 10 sicarios rushed the stage, and the guy had security. I mean, they could handle the sicarios. And that night is where I say that was the turning leaf in Colombian history, because that night, the president of Colombia, Barco Vargas, whose term was ending, called up our ambassador, United States ambassador, and basically says, United States, I need your help. United States, I have just authorized extradition on my own accord. I don't care if it's unconstitutional. I do not care. I had just signed the piece of paper. So we were that was a green light for us. We came in heavy. We started extraditing, going after a lot of Escobar traffickers. Escobar was our prize. We always missed him.
Javier, was the order always to kill Escobar, or did that come later after he started killing all these people?
You know what? There was really no orders to kill Pablo Escobar. I mean, it was understood, though.
Okay.
Yeah, it was understood. Hey, I mean, we're not going to take him. And you know what? In our defense, I tell people, sicarios would always come out shooting at us. It was a war. It was just a Wild West type fighting. And it was never, but however, if you look at If we had a chance, of course, we're going to kill him. And then that's what. And then what happened is what we never realized is that when Escobar says, all right, hey, y'all are coming after me, I am declaring war on Colombia. That's when we started seeing the infamous the deadly car bombs, 10 to 15 on a daily basis. It was the most horrific sight I'd had ever seen. I hope I never see it again. A lot of innocent people lost their lives, were killed because of those car bombs. And he was placing them at every public site available, restaurants, shopping malls, bookstores for kids. It was just a horrific sight. And if you talk to any Colombian during this time, they're going to remember someone, a friend, a relative who got killed because of this terrorism. Then, like I said, the bounties on police officers, thousands of police officers started kidnapping anybody he could so they could pressure Colombia. That was the deadliest version. That was the deadliest of Pablo Escobar that we had ever seen. And we calculated the number of killings the deaths were about 10 to 15,000. We were way off. His Sicario, Popeye, who's now dead, who's the only remaining Sicario, and he died a couple of years ago. The only guy who was left of the organization says that the killings at Pablo Escobar was more like 50,000 people that Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel killed. So it was a deadly, deadly war. And that's when everybody started. I think the world stage was, this guy is out of control. It needs to be stopped. And then I would always remember that self-surrender where Colombia agreed for him to surrender, 1991, basically. And it was the president now was Cesar Gaviria. And you know what? Sometimes I don't blame the president. If Pablo Escobar says, Mr. President, I'll self-surrender. I'll stop my bombing campaign. I mean, what do you do? But then, that self-surrender incurred that I'm going to surrender to my own prison.
Right.
I'm going to bring my own prison guards. I'm going to bring my own sicarios. Nobody can come and visit me. And he told Colombia, I'm going to pay all the expenses. Don't worry about it. Yeah, that was the first era, and I call that he won and we lost.
How did you guys end up finally cornering him when he was finally killed? How'd they find him?
Yeah, they found him through listening to telephone intercepts, triangulation between Pablo Escobar and his son Juan Pablo. Triangulation. We uncovered basically, and it's DEA who uncovered the frequency that they were using. We gave it over to them. They started listening to him, and that day, December 3rd, 1993, and Steve was there. I was not there at that final day that Pablo Escobar gets killed, but it was all Colombia National Police triangulation. They DF'd it, and it's a beautiful, great story in that the person who triangulates his location, who actually sees him on the phone, is a guy by the name of Lieutenant Hugo Martinez. And I say that because his father is Colonel Hugo Martinez, the boss of the search block. I mean, it's a class. You can't write it any better. So it's a good father-son team. Colonel Martinez, his kid, Lieutenant Martinez, is the one who actually DFs him. And Lieutenant Martinez sees Pablo Escobar on the phone talking. So that's when they decide we got to go in. And he had one Sicario left, a guy by the name of Limon. He gets shot. Cops go up the row house. Pablo Escobar's on the roof. He's shooting at the cops. Basically, Pablo Escobar loses. He gets shot 3 times. And I'm glad, and Steve was there. And Steve has all the famous, like I said, the Escobar dead photos. And he's the one who had the camera on that day. And I wish I would have been there, but the ambassador had sent me to talk to an informant in Miami that knew where Pablo Escobar was. And I tried to argue with the ambassador, said, sir, we got him located. He says, no, you're going to get on a plane The informant is waiting for you. And it was just, and the way I find out that Pablo Escobar is killed is when I see the informant in Miami, he's on the phone. He says, Javier, they just killed Pablo Escobar. I didn't even talk to him. I just got on the plane back. And luckily, Steve was there. I ended up going the next day. But guys, it's a war that I hope that we never see again. And you know what? And one of the things that sometimes we don't realize is that this war, and I'm talking about the war from Pablo Escobar, the terrorism war from Pablo Escobar, was based on extradition. Pablo did not want to come to a jail cell in the United States. He called it the extraditables. And the motto was, I prefer a tomb in Colombia than a jail cell in the United States. That was the motto. And he had it written down on a piece of paper, and he would drop these pieces of paper, leaflets, we call them, at the bomb sites, put them there, extraditables. So people knew I'm Pablo Escobar and I'm going to kill as many people as I can. In other words, so Colombia can do whatever I tell them to do, which is what happened during the first war, where he self-surrendered to his country club prison. And I hope people out there understand it was no prison. It was a country club, penthouse, whatever he wanted there, parties, sex orgies, whatever he wanted to do, he did. So, and that's what caused the escape. That once we found out he was doing whatever and he had killed a couple of guys, that's when the government decided to transfer him to a real jail cell. And that's the night that he escaped. And we were happy because it gave us another chance to go after him. And Steve and I lived with the Colombian National Police at the search block under Colonel Hugo Martinez, a Colombian hero. We lived with him for 18 months until Pablo Escobar was killed December 3rd, 1993, by the Colombian National Police, nobody else.
Listeners, if you want to hear more about this story, he's referred to his partner, Steve Murphy, and I did a show with him a couple years ago. I'll put a link in the show notes. Javier, let me end with this question before we wrap up today. He had so much money. From what I can find, they said his net worth was about $30 billion at his death. Is that accurate for that time period?
Probably even more.
Really?
But at least 30, and I think even more money, because if he just real quick, and he was sending about 2,500 kilos of cocaine on a daily basis. Airplanes would be lined up at this clandestine airstrips, 5 or 6, all were ready to go. He had boat shipments, he had human couriers, but his forte was the airplanes. 2,500 kilos of cocaine to make 1 kilo in Colombia was about $1,000. That's including all the chemicals, the labor. So to send it, your initial cost was $5,000 for 1 kilo. And in the United States in the mid-'80s, if you ever see the movie Scarface, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody has seen Scarface. That's pretty accurate description. That kilo was going from $80,000 to $100,000. So you're doing 2,500 kilos a daily basis. That's on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Billions and billions were coming back to Pablo Escobar in Medellin, Colombia. And Pablo at this time wanted cash. So there's still a lot of cash buried there around the Medellin area. So if anybody wants to take a trip, please go ahead, go look for it. I'm not, but it's still out there. That's why he had at least 30 billion.
You own a bar? How about a restaurant? Or maybe just a venue? Looking for a business or a corporate idea for your organization? I got it. Trivia. Stardust Media Trivia, that is. It's trivia on steroids. It's more than trivia. You have to experience it to understand it. It's an event. It's trivia, brand new, 2.0. Let's talk. Check the show notes, or you can email me, beforethelightspod@gmail.com. Well, Javier, thank you so much for your time and coming on and telling just a little glimpse of this huge story of Pablo Escobar. People, you can also get into their website. I'll put a link to that at DEAnarcos.com. And they have the book, Manhunters, How We Took Down Pablo Escobar. They're also the consultants to the Netflix series Narcos, the true story of Colombian violent and powerful drug cartels. I'll put all these links in the show notes where you can go listen to them. Javier, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And we gotta tell the story because it is true.
Yes, it is a great story coming from the man who was there. And that's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. My name is Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, I salute a chin chin.